I'm Cierra Bettens. Welcome to APTN News InFocus. This week, we're putting a trade war and Indigenous business in focus.
The tariffs are going forward on time, on schedule. This is an abuse that took place for many, many years. And I'm not even blaming the other countries that did this. I blame our leadership for allowing it to happen. I mean, who can blame them if they made these great deals with the United States, took advantage of the United States on manufacturing, on just about everything.
Businesses in Canada are bracing for the worst. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's moving forward with 25% tariffs on Canadian products going to America next week. Canada is threatening to retaliate, levying tariffs of its own. Now, some companies are putting planned expansions on hold, while others are turning to domestic markets to sell. And there's already a buy Canadian trend happening. But for the many Indigenous businesses already facing barriers in the Canadian market, there are fears that a trade war could disproportionately impact them. Tabitha Bull, who heads the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business, is advocating for their interests on the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations.
In every crisis, there's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for us to really look at us as Canada and as a nation, to look at the businesses that exist here, to look at how we can strengthen business supply chains within Canada. I think it's also really has brought some Canadian pride to many to really think about how are we working together. And that's both from politically across provinces and territories and with the federal government, but also as business leaders, really looking at how can we be supporting supply chains, buying Canadian, buying Indigenous.
Trade relations between Indigenous peoples in present-day U.S. and Canada predate the existence of colonial borders. Since 1794, the Jay Treaty has given some Indigenous peoples born in Canada the right to freely cross the Canada-U.S. border for trade and commerce. Shane Prost is the vice president of Bison Modular, an Indigenous company based in Manitoba that constructs housing solutions for First Nation communities. He's among the Indigenous business leaders looking to mobilize the Jay Treaty in a time of tariffs, trade wars, and economic uncertainty. Thanks for joining us today, Shane. To start off, I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit about Bison Modular and what kind of services you offer.
Bison Modular is a First Nation-owned modular company. So we build modular housing, and we've been working on that for the last 7 years. And then over the last probably 2 years, we've really also been focusing into the commercial space, because as we would work with communities, they would give us more and more feedback that development side of their needs wasn't really being met. So that's where we would start to work with them and develop different businesses with them, and then start building up things like grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, laundromats, things like that, that are more of a commercial product. And we help the nations with not just the build, but we'll actually help them with funding and anything else they need to get the job going.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was also wondering, where do you get the material for these buildings?
So almost all our material is from Canada. But the problems we are having, or we might start to face here, is the fact that our suppliers are Canadian, but we don't always know where they're getting their raw materials from. So it's been a crazy few weeks here following up with every single vendor we have to find out if their materials, that for whatever product they're supplying to us, if their raw materials are coming from Canada, the U.S., or somewhere else. So that's been a lot of work.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more about how Bison Modular could be affected by the tariffs.
Exactly. That's exactly where it is if we're so on all our suppliers that are getting their materials direct from the U.S., which is a lot of the suppliers that are bringing in things like adhesives and paints and steel, those items we are anticipating an increase on. But we've been helping work with our vendors too to try and move their purchasing power to Canadian companies as well.
Mm-hmm. And also, looking at your website, it seems like you really emphasize creating opportunities, hiring local workers, and empowering them with skills to contribute to economic growth. But I'm also wondering, could these tariffs impact your commitment to building this workforce and training workers?
It definitely can, because over the success over the last few years here has started to actually be recognized by nations like First Nations in the U.S. And we had just recently gotten our first contract in the U.S., which could be impacted. It might be delayed. We're trying to work on figuring out the J Treaty of nation-to-nation trading. But right for us, that was going to be a big expansion going to the U.S., and that's now probably been halted or delayed for a while until we can figure out the J Treaty between us and then U.S. First Nations too.
And have you had any communication, I guess, with, the Manitoba government or the federal government about, what's happening and how they're working to maybe support businesses and specifically Indigenous businesses during this time?
We've been getting some feedback, but there seems to be very little knowledge on or expertise, I should say, on how things like the J Treaty can be used. So that is something we were hoping to hear more on from both the federal and provincial government, but as well as the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. And what are some ways, I guess, in this time that people can support Indigenous businesses?
Reaching out, trying to use, or even just trying to offer, if you're a Canadian business, trying to offer some different services and supplies to these businesses, or move your purchasing power from the U.S. to Canadian businesses instead.
And would you have any advice for Indigenous businesses, during this time who are trying to navigate all this? It sounds like you've done some work yourself in terms of researching stuff like materials. Would you have any advice for working through all that right now?
I think just getting into certain kind of chambers, like joining the Indigenous Chamber of Commerce will help, CCIB, anything you can to get in a group with other Indigenous businesses, because we're all running into the same problems. So working together should help us get through it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess for Indigenous businesses specifically, do you think there's, additional barriers that they're encountering during this time or, that could get worse with these tariffs?
100%. A lot of these businesses, the Indigenous businesses especially, a lot of them are newer or smaller. So limiting their supply chain is going to really affect everyone. The newer ones that have been started, I think, will be impacted the most. Businesses that have been around for a while, they just got more experience. So they got more suppliers, more vendors, more support. But I can really see this affecting the cultural type businesses, especially any of those that are bringing up, materials for clothing or anything else like that. It's going to be really tough to get through.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you think is important for our listeners to know about this topic?
I guess just really pushing to support local and push on everyone to really start developing Canadian business and Indigenous business and trying to bring more back to Canada, more manufacturing, more supply, more of everything instead of shipping it all over other places and bringing things in from other places. Let's all start trading together.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Shane. Really appreciate it. This episode of In Focus was produced by Mark Blackburn and Charmaine Straker, with editing by Jesse Andrushko and hosted by me, Cierra Bettens. You can catch the full interview with Tabitha Bull on Face to Face, airing Tuesday, March 4th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on APTN. And if you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating and review. You can find more APTN podcasts like APTN News Brief and Truth in Politics on aptnnews.ca/podcasts or on your favorite player. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, one of the hosts of APTN National News. We've expanded our Truth in Politics panel into a weekly podcast. Each episode, panelists Jennifer Leywitz and Negon Sinclair join us to examine key issues affecting Indigenous peoples across Canada. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast player.